Emily Carter, a compassionate teacher, buys bread for Thomas, a struggling soldier, sparking an unexpected chain of events. That night, military vehicles arrive at her home, revealing Thomas's identity as the son of a high-ranking officer. Her small gesture, unnoticed by most, restores Thomas's faith in humanity, preventing a tragic outcome. The Pentagon honors her with the Civilian Moral Honor distinction, igniting a movement to bridge veteran reintegration gaps. As Emily's act ripples through the community, questions linger. How did one moment of kindness transform a town and a military system? Stay tuned to uncover the truth. If Emily's quiet kindness inspired you, join us. Subscribe to our channel to celebrate unsung heroes who change lives with small acts. Share their stories, support our channel, and help us amplify compassion in a world that needs it. Together, let's honor those who never stop serving. The air in the small bakery was thick with the scent of fresh bread, but it carried an undercurrent of tension that morning. The store clerk, her face pinched with impatience, barked at the young soldier standing before her. "No small change? Then take your business elsewhere, you freak!" Her voice cut through the hum of quiet conversations, sharp and unforgiving, drawing every eye in the room to the scene at the counter. The soldier, barely more than a buck in his faded military uniform, froze. His hand, still clutching a half-torn loaf of bread, trembled slightly. The coins he'd been counting out now scattered across the counter like fallen leaves. His face remained blank, but his eyes, dark, hollow, and heavy with something unspoken, betrayed a quiet storm of shame and exhaustion. The fresh stitches on his shoulder, the mud caked into the creases of his worn combat boots, told a story of sacrifice that no one in the room seemed to care to read. He lowered his head, his silence louder than any protest could have been. In the line behind him, Emily Carter stood quietly, her hands tucked into the pockets of her gray hoodie. At 30, she was an elementary school teacher who had stayed home that day, nursing a mild cold that left her feeling more restless than ill. She'd thrown on a baseball cap and walked to the bakery at the end of her street, craving something simple to lift her spirits. But now, watching the young soldier's humiliation unfold, her heart ached with a familiar pang. She knew that look, the one her father, a veteran, used to wear when the world turned its back on him after his service. Without a second thought, Emily stepped forward, her sneakers soft against the tiled floor. She placed 3 crumpled dollar bills on the counter, her voice steady but kind. "Give him the bread and add a bottle of water, please." She didn't linger for gratitude or acknowledgement. She didn't need it. The soldier's slight nod, a flicker of relief in his eyes, was enough. Emily turned away, ignoring the clerk's muttered warning about getting mixed up with weirdos like that. The words stung, but they weren't new. She'd heard similar sentiments before. Disdain for those who didn't fit neatly into the world's expectations. As she stepped back into line, an elderly woman behind her whispered, her voice laced with quiet indignation. "When there's a war to fight, everyone cheers for soldiers. When it's over, they're just ghosts to be ignored." Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. The truth in those words settled heavily in her chest. Walking home, the crisp morning air felt lighter against her skin. The town square buzzed with people, their eyes glued to phones, their steps hurried and disconnected. Emily's gaze lingered on the empty space where the soldier had stood, invisible to everyone but her. She wondered if that was the real sickness plaguing their community, not her stuffy nose, but the shared blindness to the people who needed to be seen most. At home, she settled into her routine, grading papers at her kitchen table, her eyes occasionally drifting to a framed photo of her father. He'd been a soldier too, a man who taught her that the smallest acts of kindness, those no one else noticed, were the ones that mattered most. His struggles after returning home, the way society praised veterans in words but abandoned them in deeds, had shaped her. She thought about the young soldier again. Was he stationed nearby, just passing through? She'd never know, and that was okay. Some moments didn't need names or explanations, just a shared spark of humanity in a world too busy to care. That night, Emily sat cross-legged on her couch, her journal open in her lap. She wrote in simple, deliberate strokes. Help someone today. Cost, value, priceless. And the television hummed in the background. Another news report about veterans struggling to find their place, about budget cuts and endless waits for mental health care. Emily's jaw tightened as she clicked it off. The hypocrisy gnawed at her, the way politicians lauded soldiers in speeches, but left them to fend for themselves in reality. She made herself a cup of tea and stood by her kitchen window, staring out at the quiet street. Nothing remarkable had happened today, she thought, just a fleeting moment that would fade by morning. She couldn't have been more wrong. As the evening deepened, Emily curled up on her sofa with a book, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows across the room. A low rumble interrupted her reading, distant at first, like the growl of a storm rolling in. She assumed it was a garbage truck or late-night construction, but the sound grew louder, more insistent, until the vibrations pulsed through her floor, making the window panes quiver. Curiosity tinged with unease, she set her book down and crossed to the window. Pulling back the curtains, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. 3 M126 Stryker armored vehicles loomed in the street, their hulking forms less than 20 meters from her house. A squad of soldiers in full gear stood in a precise line across her front yard, their silhouettes stark against the glow of streetlights. Neighbors began to stir, their faces pressed against windows, some snapping photos, others live streaming the surreal scene. Emily's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of it all. Had something gone wrong? Was this a mistake? A sharp knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. Her hand shook as she opened it, revealing an officer in crisp uniform, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "Miss Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice calm but formal. She nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, what's happening?" The officer extended a letter, its Pentagon seal glinting under the porch light. "You performed an act today that went unnoticed by most, but it was seen by the one person who needed it most. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Evans requests to meet you immediately." Before Emily could process the words, her eyes landed on a figure standing behind the officer. It was the young soldier from the bakery, now at attention, his cap pressed against his chest. His voice was soft but steady, carrying a weight that made her heart stutter. "You saved me again, ma'am. First on the front lines, and now, in my faith in humanity." His words hit her like a wave, pulling her back to the morning, to the trembling coins, the bread, the water. She hadn't saved him, she had only offered a small kindness, but to him, it had been a lifeline. The officer gestured toward one of the vehicles and Emily hesitated, her mind racing. This wasn't questioning or trouble, it was recognition, something she'd never sought. As she stepped forward, her sneakers feeling absurdly ordinary against the gravity of the moment, she glanced back at her neighbors. They watched wide-eyed from their windows and porches, some whispering, others silent, their phones capturing a story that was only just beginning to unfold. Emily climbed into the Stryker, her heart a tangle of disbelief and awe, unaware that her simple act of humanity was about to beyond the quiet street and into something far greater. The quiet suburban street, usually alive with the soft glow of Christmas lights and the gentle clutter of children's bicycles propped against porches, felt like it had been plucked from a dream and dropped into a war zone. Military vehicles rumbled through, their engines a low, ominous hum that drowned out the usual neighborhood sounds. Onlookers stood frozen, phones raised, capturing the surreal scene. Whispers rippled through the small crowd. "Is she in trouble?" a woman murmured, her brow furrowed with concern. "What could a school teacher possibly have done?" another asked, her voice tinged with disbelief and curiosity. The contrast was jarring. Tanks and armored trucks rolling past homes still decorated for a holiday long past, their festive cheer now overshadowed by the weight of something unspoken. Inside the lead vehicle, Emily sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her was a young soldier, his face a mask of guarded composure, though his eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. He hadn't spoken for the first few minutes of the ride, and the silence had pressed heavily on Emily, amplifying her confusion and unease. Finally, he broke the quiet. "I'm Thomas," he said, his voice low but steady. "Thomas Evans." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "Emily," she replied, though she sensed he already knew her name. She hesitated, then pushed forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you going to tell me what this is about?" Thomas met her gaze, and for a moment, She saw something raw in his eyes, something that spoke of battles fought far beyond the physical. "My father will explain everything," he said, pausing before adding, "but I want you to know something first. Today at the bakery, it wasn't an accident. It was a test." Emily's heart skipped. A test? Her mind raced, replaying the mundane moment at the bakery counter, her reaching for a loaf of bread, handing it to the quiet young man who seemed out of place, his hands trembling as he fumbled with his wallet. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a small act of kindness for someone who looked like he needed it. "Not for you," Thomas clarified, sensing her confusion. "For me, to see if I could function in public again. After Afghanistan." His voice cracked on the last word, and he looked away, his jaw tightening as if to hold back a flood of memories. The convoy rolled through town, drawing stares from pedestrians. Some snapped photos, others saluted, their faces a mix of respect and awe. Emily barely noticed them, her focus locked on Thomas. "I failed that test," he continued, his voice quieter now, almost confessional. "I was falling apart in there, and no one saw me. No one cared. Until you stepped in." Emily shook her head, her brow furrowing. "All I did was buy bread," she said, her voice soft but insistent. Thomas's eyes snapped back to hers, and for the first time, there was fire in his expression. "No," he said firmly, the emotion in his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "You saw me when no one else would." The vehicle approached the military base, and Emily's breath caught as massive gates swung open without the convoy even slowing. The authority behind this moment was palpable, and it only deepened her unease. What could she, a schoolteacher, have done to warrant this? The base was a world unto itself, brilliantly lit despite the late hour, with personnel moving swiftly, their steps purposeful. Emily had never set foot on a military installation before. Her father, a veteran, had always kept that part of his life locked away, sharing only vague stories that ended with a wistful smile and a change of subject. Now, surrounded by the crisp efficiency of the base, she felt like an outsider in a place where every glance carried weight. Thomas noticed her tension, the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her coat. "Don't worry," he said gently. "They're honoring you, not detaining you." The words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened her confusion. Military police stood at attention as the convoy passed, their salutes sharp and precise. Emily's mind reeled. "But why all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas's answer was simple, yet it landed like a blow. "For buying someone bread." He paused, his gaze steady. "Because when you helped me, you didn't just buy bread. You stopped a suicide." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Emily's heart pounded as the vehicle came to a stop. Thomas glanced out the window, his expression unreadable. "My father is waiting," he said. "He's been waiting for me to speak again for 6 months." The door opened and Emily stepped out into the cool night air, her legs unsteady. She was escorted through the base, past rows of buildings and soldiers moving with quiet purpose, until they reached a small auditorium. Inside, a group of high-ranking officers stood waiting, their uniforms crisp, their faces solemn. At the center was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Evans, Thomas's father, a man whose presence commanded the room. His eyes, so much like his son's, carried the weight of years of service and the pain of watching his child suffer. He approached Emily, his handshake firm but warm. "Your action today may seem small to you," he said, his voice steady but laced with gratitude, "but it gave me a reason to keep serving." He explained that Thomas had been battling severe PTSD since returning from Afghanistan. For 6 months, he had spoken only to medical personnel, retreating into a silence that had broken his father's heart. The trip to the bakery was an experiment, a desperate attempt to see if Thomas could reconnect with the world. But no one had welcomed him. No one had seen the young man struggling to hold himself together, until Emily. Without her small gesture, Thomas had planned to leave the base that night, with no intention of returning. The implication was clear, and it hit Emily like a wave. She had saved a life without even knowing it. The Department of Defense had decided to honor Emily with a civilian moral honor distinction, a rare award given to citizens whose small acts profoundly impact soldiers undergoing psychological treatment. As she stood before the officers, a framed certificate in her hands, Emily felt the weight of their gratitude. Her speech was brief, her voice trembling, but sincere. I didn't think much about it, she said. I just saw someone who looked hungry and tired, and I thought I should help. The room was silent for a moment, the simplicity of her words resonating deeply. By the early hours of the next morning, Emily was back home, the certificate clutched in her hands and an invitation to consult for a psychological recovery program for soldiers tucked into her bag. The media descended on her modest home by dawn, news vans lining the street, reporters clamoring for the story of the teacher who had restored a soldier's faith. Emily declined most interviews, overwhelmed by the attention, but agreed to one brief statement. The real heroes are the ones who come home carrying invisible wounds, she said, her voice steady despite the cameras. They don't need our pity. They need our normalcy. One night at school that Monday, her students buzzed with questions, their imaginations running wild. Why were there tanks? One asked, wide-eyed. Are you a secret agent? Another teased. Do you know the president? Emily smiled, her heart warmed by their curiosity. I just helped someone who needed it, she said simply, the same way I'd help any of you. A small girl in the back raised her hand, her voice quiet but piercing. My dad was a soldier, she said. He came back different. Mom says his heart got lost in the desert. The classroom fell silent, the weight of the child's words settling over them. Emily knelt beside her, her voice gentle. Hearts don't really get lost, she said. Sometimes they just need someone to help find them again. That evening, Lieutenant Colonel Evans appeared on national television, not to discuss military strategy or global conflicts, but to share a deeply personal story. His usual stoic demeanor cracked as he spoke of his son. We've developed protocols for physical injuries, he said, his voice breaking. We can get a wounded soldier from the battlefield to an operating room in under an hour. But for the wounds we can't see, we're still learning. Sometimes the medicine isn't in a hospital. Sometimes it's in a bakery, in the kindness of a stranger who sees what others miss. His words lingered, a quiet call for understanding, for connection, for the small acts that could heal what medicine alone could not. At Fort Campbell, Thomas stepped into a therapy room of his own accord for the first time, a decision that felt both foreign and fragile. The sterile walls and soft hum of the air conditioner seemed to press against him, amplifying the weight of his choice. When the therapist asked what had shifted, Thomas's voice was low but clear, carrying a conviction he hadn't felt in years. Someone out there, a civilian, looked at me and saw a man, not a uniform, not a problem to be fixed or avoided, just me. His words lingered, heavy with the memory of a fleeting moment at a bakery where a stranger's kindness had cracked open a door he'd thought was bolted shut. That week, the military's Health Services Division rolled out a new initiative called Bread and Dignity. It was a program born from necessity, aimed at helping veterans like Thomas ease back into civilian life through small, deliberate interactions with the public. Each encounter was carefully structured to rebuild trust, to mend the invisible rift between those who served and those who hadn't. Meanwhile, Emily, the school teacher whose simple act had sparked this change, received a handwritten note from the bakery clerk who'd once been curt with Thomas. The paper was creased, the ink slightly smudged, as if the clerk had hesitated before sending it. I'm sorry, it read. My brother didn't come back from Iraq. Seeing soldiers, it's like staring at a wound that won't heal. I've pushed them away to protect myself, but I'm trying to do better. The words hit Emily like a quiet wave, stirring a mix of empathy and sorrow. She could feel the clerk's grief woven into each letter, a reminder that pain often masqueraded as coldness. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into her coat pocket, where it became a small, constant weight, a reminder of the unseen burdens others carried. A week later, Emily's phone rang, and she was stunned to hear the Secretary of Defense on the line. His voice was steady, not polished for cameras or laced with political charm, but genuine. He wasn't calling for a photo op or a press release. Instead, he asked her to consult on veteran reintegration programs. We've got experts on trauma, PTSD, all the clinical pieces, he said. But what we're missing is someone who understands kindness, who knows how to bridge the gap between a soldier's heart and the world they come home to. Emily sat frozen, her coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter. She hadn't set out to change anything beyond one man's mourning, yet her small gesture had exposed a truth. Billions in funding could mend bodies and minds, but only human connection could heal the soul's quiet fractures. Thomas, meanwhile, found himself stepping into a new role. He began speaking at military bases across the country, his story spilling out to rooms filled with soldiers and their families. Each time he stood before them, his hands trembled less, his voice grew steadier. He always started the same way, his words a lifeline to those listening. "I was saved twice," he'd say, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Once by medics in Kandahar, who pulled me from the edge of death, and once by a school teacher in a bakery, who reminded me I was still human." His story rippled outward, carried by whispers and shared posts in military communities worldwide. Letters began arriving, hundreds of them, from service members, spouses, parents. Each one told a story of isolation, of feeling like an outsider in their own hometown, and of small moments of reconnection that had begun to mend what war had broken. Before deployments, a new briefing was added to soldiers' preparations, a simple but powerful message. "You've heard the bread story," the officer would say. "When you come home, know that civilians are waiting to see you, to know you, not just to thank you for your service." It was a reminder that home wasn't just a place, but a feeling, one that required both sides to build. Thomas carried this message like a torch, its light growing brighter with every telling. Emily's life on the surface remained much the same. She still taught her fourth graders, still threw on her worn hoodie to run errands, still navigated the rhythm of her small town. But something had shifted. Strangers who once averted their eyes now offered warm smiles or a quick nod as she passed. The town seemed to exhale, its edges softening. One morning, a letter arrived from Thomas's mother, its envelope worn from travel. "I don't know who raised you to be so kind," it read, "but thank you for saving my son in a way no doctor could." Emily's throat tightened as she read it, her fingers tracing the words. She pinned the letter to her refrigerator, right beside photos of her students, their gap-toothed smiles a daily reminder of why she kept going. Then, without warning, her classroom fell silent one Saturday morning. The chatter of her students stopped as a young soldier walked in, his posture rigid, but his eyes soft. "I'm here to teach the kids how to fold a flag," Thomas said, his voice carrying a quiet resolve. Emily's heart skipped, but she said nothing, only placed her hand over her chest in the way she'd seen soldiers greet one another, a gesture of respect, of shared understanding. The children swarmed around Thomas, their curiosity brighter than the morning sun streaming through the windows. He unfolded a flag with care, his hands steady as he explained each precise fold. "This one's for honor," he said, his voice low but firm. "This one's for those who served." Emily watched from her desk, her mind drifting to her father, who'd taught her the same folds when she was a girl, his calloused hands guiding hers through the ritual. After class, Thomas stayed behind, his boots scuffing the floor as he hesitated. "I'm in therapy twice a week now," he said, his gaze fixed somewhere past her shoulder. "Dad thinks maybe I could teach history someday, when I'm ready to leave the service." Emily smiled, her voice warm but certain. "You'd be good at that. You've lived it." Thomas finally met her eyes, a question burning in his. "Why did you help me that day? You didn't even know me." Emily paused, searching for the right words. "Maybe because in that moment, you weren't just a soldier. You were a person who needed bread, and I could give that to you." Thomas nodded, a slow, thoughtful motion. "Sometimes," he said, "that's all we need to be. Just people." A month later, Emily found a small package in her school mailbox. Inside was a combat medal, its weight heavy in her palm, encased in a simple glass frame. A note was tucked beside it, written in Thomas's careful script. "This was for bravery under fire," it read. "But you showed me a different kind of bravery. This belongs with you." Emily didn't put the medal on display. Instead, she slipped it into her purse, where it became a quiet companion, a reminder that courage wasn't always loud or grand. Sometimes it was as simple as seeing someone for who they were. At the bakery, something had changed too. A small sign now sat by the register. "Veterans welcomed with respect. We remember your service." The clerk, who'd once been sharp with Thomas, now wore a yellow ribbon pin, a silent apology in the gesture. Emily ordered her usual coffee and bagel, saying nothing about the sign. Some transformations didn't need words. They just needed to take root. The town itself felt different. lighter. Veterans who once lingered on the edges of community life now sat in coffee shops, their laughter mingling with the clink of mugs. They showed up at school events, their presence no longer a rarity, but a thread in the town's fabric. When a reporter later asked Emily if she was proud of starting a movement, she shook her head. "I didn't start anything," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I just reminded people of something we'd forgotten, that kindness can be a bridge, and sometimes that's enough." Her words carried the weight of truth, a truth that had begun with a single act and was now weaving its way through a community, one small connection at a time. In a world that often feels cold and rigid, bound by unspoken rules and relentless expectations, what it truly craves is a touch of compassion, a spark of humanity that can pierce through the darkest moments. A single, deliberate act of kindness, offered at just the right moment to someone teetering on the edge, can be a lifeline. It can pull a soul back from the brink of despair, offering hope where none seem to exist. You may never know the full weight of your actions or the depth of the wounds carried by the person you help. But when your heart is in the right place, when your intentions are pure, the universe has a way of weaving your small gesture into something far greater than you could imagine. A ripple of goodness spreads, touching lives in ways you might never see. She didn't set out to change the world that day. All she did was buy a loaf of bread. It was a simple act one most would overlook, a routine transaction at a corner store, the kind of thing you do without a second thought. But to her, it wasn't just bread. It was a quiet offering, a hand extended to someone whose eyes carried a heaviness she couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the way the stranger's shoulders slumped or the faint tremble in their voice as they fumbled for coins they didn't have. She didn't know their story, didn't need to. Her heart ached with an unspoken understanding, a silent recognition of their struggle. So she stepped forward, paid for the bread, and offered a smile. Not out of pity, but out of a deep, unshakable belief that even the smallest gesture could matter. What she didn't know was the chain reaction she'd set in motion. That single loaf of bread, that fleeting moment of kindness, didn't just feed a hungry body, it stirred something much larger. It caught the attention of a system built on discipline and order, a military network that thrives on precision and protocol. Yet even they, with their rigid structures and stoic facades, couldn't help but pause. Her act was a quiet rebellion against a world that often forgets to care, a reminder that humanity still pulses beneath the surface. It was as if her kindness sent a signal, loud and clear, that reached far beyond the corner store. It resonated with those who dedicate their lives to service, who understand that true strength lies not in power but in empathy. Her simple gesture mobilized them, not with orders or commands, but with a shared conviction. We still see kind people. We still believe in them. The soldiers, the officers, the entire system, they didn't just notice her, they felt her. They saw in her action a reflection of the values they hold dear, the ones they fight for in ways both seen and unseen. Her kindness was a beacon, a reminder that the world isn't as broken as it sometimes seems. It stirred their hearts, rekindling a sense of purpose that can fade in the grind of duty. They didn't know her name, but they didn't need to. She wasn't just a woman buying bread. She was proof that goodness endures, that quiet heroes walk among us, unnoticed, but never insignificant. And so her story spread, not because she sought recognition, but because the world couldn't stay silent about it. Her act, so small in its simplicity, carried a weight that demanded to be felt. It wasn't about the bread anymore. It was about what it represented. It was about a woman who saw someone's pain and chose to act, about a system that saw her heart and chose to honor it. It was about a world that, for too long, has overlooked the quiet, kind souls who keep its spirit alive. These are the stories that deserve to be told, the ones that remind us of the heroes who never stop serving, whether with a loaf of bread or a lifetime of sacrifice. When you share their stories, when you give voice to their quiet courage, you give their actions meaning. You remind the world that compassion is not forgotten, that kindness is not lost. And in doing so, you become part of something greater, a movement that celebrates the unseen, the unsung, and the unbreakable human spirit.